Yeah.
Okay. Hello everyone. We are Group 4. So today we will briefly introduce the case, which the name is Crane in Right of the Ontario versus Rain Engineer. So this case took place in the Supreme Court of Canada in 1981. Even though it has been appealed from the lower court, and it involved in a building mistake made by the Rain Engineering. So this main issues was whether the company could recover its $115,000 tender deposit after discovering the error. So next, Evelyn will give us more detail about this.
Hi everyone, so I would go with the fact of the case, which was actually the sequence of events that happened in the legal issue. So the first one was when the water resource company commissioned called for tenders not pay construction project, and Ron Engineering bid for $2,648,000, accompanied by the required $150,000 check, which was required. And there was the other bid was there was the lowest offer, which was $632 million, which was also the closest competitor amount. And the clause also states that it's either the bidder backed out and didn't sign, or within 7 days, and the commission could retain its deposit. So I would go.
Hi everyone, so I will be discussing about the legal issues that court has to determine in this case. So the first and the major issue was, can the contractor Ron Engineering recover their deposit of $150,000 after making this major mistake in their bid? The second issue was whether there is a binding contract automatically created when there is a tender submitted. The third issue that the court has to determine is whether the tender is still capable of acceptance even though there is a major mistake in the calculation. And the final issue was, can the owner legally keep the deposit even if Ron Engineering refused to sign? So the next we will be talking.
Okay, thanks Aloni. So today I'll be talking about the contract law principles for this case. So the first and big question is, did the legally binding contracts happen at the moment the tender was submitted? At our first glance, it might seem like no. However, the court found it different. That's why this case is so interesting and unique. So firstly, we have contract A/B. The court found that since this is a unique case and like this has tenders, this has to be divided into two parts. The first, contract A, that is formed at the moment the tender was submitted, and then contract B, that may or may not be formed after, depending on the owner and the tender bids for the construction. Secondly comes binding of submission. So whenever the court said that whenever the firm is placing or submitting a tender, it becomes irreplaceable. Even if later on you change your mind or find some errors in your calculation that it's not as profitable, it doesn't matter. The court's gonna see whether the tender has been submitted or not. Once you submit it, it's done. Tender rules control. Even if tender rules control. So in terms of the tender, the pre-specified terms are the most important thing here. Normal contract laws will not apply just in terms of tenders. Fourth comes the security of obligations. Now, when the owner, or for the owner, the security of obligations is there, so that when the tender is placed, even if the tender placing party does not or wants to back out of the clause, it's the security for the owner, so that the constructions are placed or takes place after. So because of that, even if the party placing the tender decides that they do not want to do the construction, they cannot have their security deposit back. Hidden mistakes, just like the tender rule controls and the binding over submissions, once you have submitted the tender, even if there's small or big or giant errors, but in your part, due to calculations, it cannot be changed. Finally, we have system fairness. Here, together, these principles are here so that they guarantee fairness, trust, and certainty during the tendering process. Owners can rely on the tendering process, and honest bidders know all the rules. So everyone is actually playing on a fair playing field. Next, I'd like to call Renee. Thank you.
For this part of the case, I will focus on the court decision and reasoning. The Supreme Court ruled in favor of the owner, which was the Ontario Water Resources Commission. This meant that the owner was allowed to keep Wrong Engineering's $150,000 deposit. The key reason was that when Wrong Engineering submitted tender, it created what the court called Contract A. This was not the final construction contract, but it was still a legal contract connected to tendering process. The court reasoning was based on fairness and certainty in business. In construction binding, owners need to rely on the tender they receive. If contractors were allowed to withdraw their bids after the deadline because of internal mistakes, the whole tendering process will become unreliable. Other bidders will also be affected because the process will no longer be fair or predictable. Even though Wrong Engineering mistake was genuine, the court said it was an internal calculation error. The company intended to submit the tender and the mistake was not caused by the owner. The error happened because Wrong Engineering forgot to include about $750,058 in labor and material costs in its own bid calculation. So the court decided that Wrong Engineering had to take responsibility for its own mistake. The owner did not create the error and was not legally required to protect Wrong Engineering from the consequences. In the end, this case shows how important it is for business to carefully review legal and financial documents before submitting them. Because once a tender is submitted, it can become legally binding.
Okay, now talking about the significance of the case, the first thing is that it fundamentally changed how Canadian contract law addresses the tendering process. Firstly, as my colleague Tasmin said, it established the Contract A, Contract B framework, meaning that when a contractor submits a compliance bid, a legally binding document known as Contract A is immediately formed. This contract framework was not implemented, or at the time that this case was in the lower court. In the first trial court and in the appeal court, this framework had not been established, and that was why the judges felt like Wrong Engineering should win the case because of the mistake that was made. The second significance is the fact that this case strengthened fairness and structure in the tendering process. Usually, or in the previous times, when a contract is made, the obligations for both parties only arise when the final construction contract has been signed. But by virtue of this case, it was established that there are legal duties that arise when the first contract, that is the tender or the bid, is first submitted. The third, the last point is that contractors cannot decide to back out of their tenders just because they made a mistake or they changed their mind, because the mistakes now become legally binding. And also, project owners are supposed to follow the conditions of the conditions in the tender document. Finally, the practical implications of this case for business owners or for organizations, that is contractors, they should be very careful when they are preparing their bids, because they know that even if they make mistakes, the court is not going to take that into account because they have signed Contract A. And then for the project owners or for the organizations that are issuing the tenders,
This decision provides certainty for them that bids can actually be reliable and that the process will remain fair and competitive. Overall, this case remains a foundational precedent in Canadian contract and procurement law as far as in modern bidding disputes nowadays. Thank you. I'm going to call Amy for the conclusion.
So in conclusion, this case ended up with the victory of Ontario, and wrong engineer lost its deposit. And this case showed the companies are responsible for the mistake for their bids, even if those mistakes are on international. And the key license is very simple, like always review your bid carefully before submitting. That's it. Thank you.